Good afternoon, good people. It's me, Shelby, here to do another video on Jay-Z and his impact outside of the East Coast, in particular the South, but I'm also going to talk about the West Coast too, in the Midwest. But the reason why I want to talk about this is because there's a video, this site called the Art of Dialogue. And to me, they interviewed Spice One, and they interviewed Big Gipp. And so based on some of the things that Spice One were saying and Big Gipp were saying about Jay-Z, I kind of want to respond to it because me personally, I think I disagree with both of them as far as their reasons why they felt a certain way about Jay-Z in regards to his impact. So I'm going to respond to it. Also, the Art of Dialogue, to me, this site is a relatively new site. And to me, when the subject of Tupac comes up, or these regional, like East Coast, West Coast, Southern hip hop, they instigate a lot of things when they interview people, certain artists. So, and Big Gipp is one of them. And then Spice One said something crazy. So I just want to get people's thoughts on this. And I'm gonna give you my 2 cents now because I've been into this culture a very, very long time. I'm a record collector. I collect vinyl records, collect cassette tapes, CDs, things like that. Jay-Z. So the Billboard put out their top 100 artists of all time. And in a nutshell, Jay-Z got the #1 spot, and people had an issue with it. Certain artists, Big Gipp and Spice One in particular, felt as if Tupac should have been #1. But that's, and I respect their opinion. Jay-Z wasn't my #1 pick, but I can respect the Billboard putting him #1 for various reasons. Had Billboard put Nas at #1, had Billboard put Jay-Z at #1, had Billboard put Tupac at #1, had they put KRS-One, Rakim, Big Daddy Kane, Cool G Rap, I wouldn't have been mad at it because I could see why they would be #1 to people, even to Billboard. But Jay-Z won it. And I'm just trying to figure out why. It's one thing to disagree with it, but why are you making such a fuss about him being #1, given his track record, his resume, and his impact nationwide and worldwide? Why would you be upset at that? Because I could sit back and although I may disagree with it, I'd be like, I can see why he's #1. Just being an objective person. So when Spice One does his interview, he says that he prefers Tupac over Jay-Z. Respect. I can respect that. But then when he gets into his reasons why, he absolutely makes no logistical sense to me. So what ends up happening, and Big Gipp did this too, is this gets morphed and transcended into hating Jay-Z, and it gets really the bottom denominator is East Coast. It's a hate for East Coast. There's a bias against the East Coast, and Jay-Z gets the blowback of all of that because he's from the East Coast, because he's been so successful. Had Lil Wayne or Snoop or somebody been in Jay-Z's position, somebody that wasn't from the East Coast, I think that their whole thought process would be different. But because Jay-Z's from New York, they have an issue with it, and it's Jay-Z. So that's just my opinion and my observation. And Spice One wasn't making no logistical sense. It's one thing to be a fan of Tupac as he is and keep it pushing. Hey, I love Tupac, I love Jay-Z, because he pretty much likes Jay-Z, he just preferred Tupac. And that's all he could have said. I love Jay-Z, I love his music, but I prefer Tupac. But then he goes into this he does what a lot of people does, which is try to, besmirch Jay-Z. And so he's like, well, I rode to Tupac and people out here ride to Tupac, not Jay-Z as much. But then he goes to cover himself from the East Coast bashing, because that's where it was heading. He tries to cover himself by saying the West Coast was bumping 50 Cent, the West Coast was bumping DMX. Okay. And then he said this: they also bumped Jay-Z, but not as much compared to 50 Cent and DMX. So basically, you're saying they was bumping Jay-Z. You know what I'm saying? So, but you paint these narratives that as if people weren't playing Jay-Z out there. Now, for me, an objective person, Jay-Z sold millions of records. When you go gold, you are having impact outside of your region. You're having impact. You're having impact nationwide now. When you go gold, you are selling everywhere in all 50 states. Just by you going gold. Jay-Z sold millions of records. And there's no way Spice One could sit there and tell me that Jay-Z wasn't hitting out there in the West Coast. That would be false. I know that's false just based on the numbers alone. Then where he messes up at, he says DMX and 50 Cent, and they sold just as many records as Jay-Z. Relatively speaking, they sold, for the most part, sold just as many records. So you got two East Coast dudes, 50 Cent and DMX, that you admit were being played out in the West Coast. Jay-Z did the same things that they've done, and you're trying to besmirch him, and you admit that he was being played out in the West Coast, but not compared to those two. So you have to, so that just tells me the bias right there, like Spice, and then Big Gipp too. Big Gipp does pretty much the same thing. There's no way you could tell me, Big Gipp, that Jay-Z did not have input. And I'm not trying to be biased, I'm just being objective. Because Jay-Z has sold too many records for him not to have these impacts everywhere. So in Atlanta, if Jay-Z were to do a show in Atlanta, he's going to do it at an arena. And it's going to be a packed arena. Let's just be real about that. Down in Atlanta, he has a fan base down here. He has a fan base out west. He has a fan base in the Midwest. And he has a fan base on the East Coast. Okay, so you guys need to stop. And I'm talking to the Southern people, because the Southern people are pretty much doing all the Jay-Z bashing. The West Coast people are not doing it as much, just a little bit. Spice One's one of them, but you don't see them bashing Jay-Z as much like the South does. And the South talking about New York and the East Coast. But you guys do a lot of unnecessary bashing, and I have a theory on why you do it. But you're not being realistic. I think people in the South are in denial, and there seems to be some envy with New York living inside your heads. Big Gipp from Atlanta, and I love Big Gipp. I love Goody Mob. Man, they had some banging albums. But just his whole thought process on things does not make any sense either. He tried to, besmirch Jay-Z as well, and made it seem as if 50 Cent and DMX get played more in Atlanta than Jay-Z does. When, to me, that don't make any sense. They all did the same numbers everywhere. All three of them are being played everywhere. Okay, so it doesn't make any sense, and I'll give you this example. I'm from the Midwest. I'm from Milwaukee. Okay, and Jay-Z was getting played here heavily. So was 50 Cent, so was DMX. Jay-Z was definitely hitting here in the Midwest. And then you got some people from the Midwest that are saying Jay-Z wasn't hitting here, but that's a lie. That's completely a lie. He was definitely hitting in the Midwest, just like everywhere else. And when I hear Big Gipp, just talk like this, it's just he's just in denial. It's like he's like just got this thing where New York lives inside his head. But let me just say this: when I lived in New York, uh, Dr. Dre had the Chronic. Okay, the first album, the first Chronic album, at its peak and in its prime, that album sold 3.5 million records, and that was a big deal back then. And this, I think, it's way more past that now. He sold a lot with that, but in '93, he sold 3.5, and New York City was playing that album. You would hear that street being, you would hear the Chronic being played in Harlem, in Brooklyn, in Queens, in Long Island. Dr. Dre had a fan base in New York. He sold 3.5 million records. There's no way that 3.5 million records was confined to the West Coast. He had his tentacles spread that everybody across the nation, including New York, including Philly and Boston, were playing his record. Not just the Chronic. You had Snoop's album, Doggy Style, being played in New York, being bumped in cars in Harlem and all over. Scarface from Houston was being played in New York heavily. MC8. MC8 was also being replayed, and he was respected. I remember when Wu-Tang, members of Wu-Tang Clan, brought MC8 out to New York, into Harlem, into Queens, in Brooklyn. And people there respected MC8. The people there, if MC8 did an interview and could talk about that experience, he would tell you. People showed him love. And people, and so MC8 was getting played out there. Cypress Hill was getting played in New York. MC8 had a relationship with Gang Starr. That's why him and Premier are so tight now. MC8 has done records with Pete Rock. So, the respect was there. The Far Side, Souls of Mischief, all those West Coast artists were getting played by people in New York. And so, even to this day, you got Kendrick Lamar, you got The Game. So, these artists are getting played by people in the streets in New York. I say that because I want to make the point that when you sell a lot of records, people are you have impact nationwide. It's not confined to a certain area. And I think that's what some people in the South do not grasp. And I think, Big Gipp is just one of those people that are just instigating unnecessarily. Do I think he hate New York? No. But I think that what's happening with people like Gipp and a lot of people from the South is that they made all this impact, and they did. And they feel as if they don't get respected, so they take it out on Jay-Z. Let me give you an example of what I mean. So let's forget about the Billboard Top 100 for a second. When you hear the average person, even people in the South, but when you see the average person, where you're on the West Coast, Midwest, whatever, and they name their top 5, top 20, most of the time, or that it's going to be New York artists or East Coast artists that's going to fill that list up, because New Yorkers are known to be better skillfully rappers, lyrically skillful rappers, compared to the South and the West Coast. Now, don't get me wrong, the West Coast got their fair share of lyricists, easily. They do. I was out there. To me, they're right there with New York. New York is pretty much known for it, but the West Coast definitely have lyricists out there. The South, they don't really focus on that at all, because the West Coast and the East Coast, they have lyricists. They're different, but they're also the same in a lot of ways too. But the South is completely different from both of them, and they are not lyricists. They don't focus on it. So when you hear people, the typical person, what's your top 5? You typically hear Jay-Z, Nas, Biggie, right? You hear KRS-One, Rakim, Big Daddy Kane. And then even people from the Midwest like Eminem or Royce the 5'9", somebody from the West, you hear Tupac, you hear Snoop, you hear Ice Cube, Corrupt, lyricists. You know, the South only has Andre 3000, Scarface, and definitely Ludacris. Ludacris is probably the most skillful out of the three. Andre 3000 is skillful too, but Ludacris is a punchline rapper, very, very lyrical and witty with his wordplay. So, and I think that gets to the South that most people still bring up New York as far as the rappers, even with the producers. Who's the best producer of all time? You'll hear Dr. Dre, DJ Premier, Pete Rock, Just Blaze, Kanye West, Timberland, Swiss Beats, the Neptunes. You don't really hear anybody from the South. Now, I'm going to get this argument from some people. Well, Virginia's the South. Timberland and Neptunes are from the South. But Virginia, to me, is not what I would be looking at as Southern. They don't make Southern music. So Virginia is more like they are South, but they more are like a mid-Atlantic type of state, where you get a mixture of North and South. That's what I think of Virginia. You get North and South mixed, where there's the North and the South and they intermingling. And when you get past Virginia and go into North Carolina, you're starting to head more into the Southern territory. Now, and here's another thing I want to say. North Carolina. North Carolina is South, but, they're not doing, like, you got Rhapsody, you have Little Brother, and Fontino's guys, Ninth Wonder. They're not doing traditional Southern, what you would call Southern type of hip hop. Even though to me it's Southern, but it's not like they're more lyrical, they're more witty with wordplay, things like that. The music is more aligned with East Coast, New York, Northern East Coast music. So the South, like Big Gipp, if they heard Little Brother and Ninth Wonder, they would be thinking East Coast, as opposed to Southern. And Big Gipp, to me, he said one of the most dumbest things I ever heard him say. This is so Ludacris, right? Ludacris, he said that Ludacris does not get love in Atlanta because he tried to rub elbows with New York. I don't know what he's talking about, but that doesn't make sense. But I think what he was getting at is that because Ludacris is lyrical, he has wordplay, he has a pen game, he's witty he has a vocab, punchlines. He is more relatable to New York than he is with Atlanta. That's what I think he was getting at. And I think that's ridiculous. I think that's stupid. Ludacris is straight up Atlanta. He rep it. And yeah, New York is going to resonate with somebody like him due to his skills. He has it. You guys are not down in Atlanta are not lyrical like that. So you may not be resonating with Ludacris, but he was hitting down here. You can't deny that. So why make that an issue? I don't understand why Big Gipp injected that. So the bottom dollar and the bottom line is this. I think the South needs to stop letting New York live inside their heads. You're getting the respect, even though you may not feel like you're getting it, but you get the respect. Like I said, Lil Wayne has sold millions of records too. You don't think he has fans in New York? He does. Outkast has fans in New York. I was there, and I know they got the fans there. If you go on a radio station, who's your top 10 groups ever? When you listen to like Peter Rosenberg, and they Outkast gets mentioned. So I don't understand why a lot of you guys are unnecessarily instigating things. But that's my theory on why I think the South keep having New York in their heads, because when you hear your average person mention the best rappers, they tend to be East Coast cats. Styles P, Jadakiss, Karis, Ron, Rakim, Jay-Z, Nas, Biggie, and then even the West Coast rappers get mentioned. You know, like I said, you know, people will bring up Snoop. It's Snoop in his prime, but it's definitely a freestyler. He can freestyle off the head. He can do a lot of things. Kendrick Lamar, you know, Corrupt, you know, Souls of Mischief. All those guys are dope rappers. The Southerners are not lyricals, and I think that's what it is. Um, Even in the Midwest, Kanye West and Common are Midwest, but they got like a Midwest East Coast thing. They can relate more to New York and Philly because they're Northerners. They don't mix Southern music, and so that them being more relatable to Detroit and New York and Philly, Cassidy, Beanie Siegel, all those guys, and I think that gets to you guys. I think that gets to the South, and you feel like you're not respected, but you are. You're trendsetters, but you have to stop taking your frustrations out on Jay-Z because you can't deny the evidence is super clear that he's had impact nationwide. If he goes to Memphis, if Jay-Z goes to Memphis and does an arena, it's going to sell. He's going to sell out that arena. If he doesn't sell out, he's going to have a ton of people going to the shows. And I know you guys are playing him in his prime. Jay-Z is a lot of things. There's a lot of things I disagree with him. But the one thing you cannot do is front on his resume. Especially the Reasonable Doubt album, Hard Night, Blueprint, a bunch of albums he's done. You really cannot front. And I know you guys are playing it. Just as people like where I'm from in Milwaukee, we're playing Spice One stuff. We're playing 3 6 Mafia, but we also play Jay-Z. We also play Outkast. We played The Game, Dr. Dre, all of it. You know what I'm saying? And I know you guys did the same thing because I was down in Atlanta and heard it in the West Coast. You know, so I mean, Jay-Z wrote Still Dre for Dr. Dre. Jay-Z wrote that, and that's a West Coast song. You know, T.I. did, you know, Swagger Like Us. That's produced by Kanye. The King is Back is done by Just Blaze. That's all the Jay-Z impact. Because if Just Blaze and Kanye West were Rockefeller producers and Bink, and T.I. worked with these cats, and he got his biggest hits from the Northern producers. Switch Beats, bring them out. That's Switch Beats. And you wasn't playing it? I mean, come on. And T.I. even stated this. He wanted to work with not just trap cats in the South, but he wanted to work with Northern cats too. He said this. So did Lil Wayne. Lil Wayne did stuff with Just Blaze, Switch Beats, Kanye West. You know what I'm saying? And Rick Ross did the same thing. You know what I'm saying? So I don't know what you guys are talking about. Jay-Z not having impact. You guys are playing those records. You ain't got a front for me. You know, just the bottom line is just give the man his props. Spice One and Big Gipp, give the man his props. You can disagree with the top 10 by Billboard, but you ain't got to be with this bias stuff. Just say, hey, Tupac's my favorite rapper. I think he's #1, but I definitely love Jay-Z. You know what I'm saying? He has some dope ass shit. And leave it alone. That's it. Instead of instigating things because you get these debates that are unnecessary and you know, for me, just like I said, just based on observational evidence, when people name their top 10, no matter where they're from, it's typically rappers from New York or the West. Peace and love.